Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia. This is basically a game of tactical combat set in the world of the Masters of the Universe. It can be played in several modes and is based on scenarios. So you're gonna set up the board in different ways and with different characters and for different objectives depending on what you're trying to achieve. First, a quick look at the board, which I've actually set up for the scenario Buried Secrets, which I'm gonna play next. And in this scenario, one side starts in the middle of the board, and they're trying to collect those tokens representing objectives. And the other side starts on the sides of the board, and they're trying to KO the players. So each scenario will posit that one side, the sides are of course, good and evil, but mechanically each scenario has a side called the controller and another side called the player side. And so the standard, I would say the default idea is one versus many. The controller is usually one player and the players are everybody else. So say this would be a default situation in which you have one controller and two players each controlling one of the player sides. So this would be a situation for three players. Controller, player 1, player 2, or controller, player 2, player 3, if you want to call them that way. You can also play with number of players not corresponding to the number of characters. So, for example, if you have a controller and then a single player controlling two other characters, nothing against that in the mechanics of the game. You can also play true solo, meaning that you play against an AI. You can also play multiplayer solo, which is my version, in which I simply, and that's how I'm gonna play it, and how I played the game in the past. I control the controller side, and then I control each individual character. There's a way of randomizing activations in which that works pretty well. Now, a couple of concepts, a couple of ideas. The players' characters each will have a display, such as the one that you see here, a plastic display, a card representing their actions, their attack abilities. Tila, for example, has a standard melee attack. We know that because of the sword symbol. She has an armor of 1. She has 7 hit points. When they go down to 0, she's KO'd. She's not out of the game, but she has to restart from the spawning place on the board for her side, and also there may be other effects. For example, in this scenario, the controller is trying to KO the player characters, so KOing her is very good for them. Then she has some special actions and abilities that are triggered by using power, which is the universal currency in the game. It is represented by these cubes. By activating and through other effects, characters will gain power, and you place the power cubes there. And so then you simply remove those cubes to activate those abilities. Those abilities there, for example. She gets that action of spawning a royal elite minion by spending a cube, and then by spending another cube of power, she can activate those, which is why I keep the card for the Royal Guard next to her, because again, that's what she does. She summons them and she activates them. Then you see these other slots here. This is where you place these other powers. There will be game effects that will trigger the acquisition of these powers. They acquired in order, first green, then yellow, then red, and each has 2 versions. So when you acquire a certain rank, you can choose which one you wanna attach, and the same would be for the other characters here, Orko, for example. And again, once you unlock them, then when you acquire power, you can also choose to place your power cubes there to activate the corresponding abilities. The controller also has characters, of course. They go next to this at a display here. They work slightly differently. Incidentally, each character has 2 versions of their card. And this is the version that you use when you're using, say, the character Evelyn as for the controller, and this one when for the character. The controller places their power cubes here when they acquire power for their characters. But the controller also has minions, so specific units that go on the board. They are weaker than the regular characters, but you got more. And that would be the minion that I'm using for this scenario, for example. Also, we have these other special abilities that are specific for the controller. They also come in two flavors, regular and better. And when the character, the player character gets these abilities, the controller gets to improve their mega powers instead. They also get to unlock special abilities on their characters, and you see these are the slots here. There will be effects that will place cubes there, and this is how you then activate the good stuff printed on those cards. An important concept, the balance of power. When the character is spending power to activate their abilities, the controller gets these cubes to fuel their abilities. Pretty neat idea, huh? So just different ways in which the same concept of acquiring power to use abilities printed on cards, different ways in which the controller and the player act around those ideas. Another important concept, the activation track. So each character in the game has activation cards, and again they come in two versions, one when that character is on the player side, and one version for when that character is the controller side. At the beginning of the round, each player takes cards for their characters, and then they place them in these slots here. As you can see, they alternate controller, player, controller, player, controller, player. So by placing these cards here face down at the beginning of the round, players commit to the order in which they will activate their characters. Also, the later you activate a character in a turn, the more power you receive. So, for example, if this is the situation that the players have set up at the beginning of the round, then when we actually start the round, Evelyn will activate first. There's an advantage in that, and will receive no power for that. Then, after Evelyn resolves her activation, Tila activates, and Tila receives a cube that goes anywhere on her display to power up any ability that has already been unlocked. So these are always available. These become available only as the game progresses and those cards are acquired. So definitely the game ramps up, accelerates, and more powerful effects are unlocked, but there's this nice trade-off that the more you wait to activate a character, the more power you get. The controller also has a special card called Strategy, and when that is activated, they may gain power. As usual, they get to use their special abilities here on the board, spending energy that they've activated, and also when the strategy card is revealed is when they get to activate their minions. Moreover, game effects will give the controller access to strategy cards that can be pretty good, and by default the controller will use the effects printed on top when playing a strategy card. If some effects are unlocked, then the controller also gets to use the bottom effect of a strategy card. This display here also keeps track of the hit points that the characters have. There is a standard amount starting point. Beastman is quite the beast, has a lot of health, other characters not so much. When they're hit, you move the corresponding token down. When they heal, you move it back up. And of course, when he reaches the KO space is when the character is temporarily knocked out. Finally, we have this token here that keeps track of how many of these effects and which ones are acquired. Green for green, yellow for yellow. And also, again, remember, when these ranks are unlocked, that is also when the controller gets to improve their personal skills. So it seems like a lot, but once you cover all of those things, you have most of the basics, or the basic ideas covered. When you activate a character, indeed, the character will get to move or to attack. You get two actions when you activate a character. You can activate them in any order. Moving is an action, attacking is another action. When you attack, you roll a number of dice based on the attack value. And then, well, for example, this one acts up to the range effect. And if you're using a melee, these are hits. If you're using a range attack, these are hits. The melee gives you 3 hits, the range gives you 1. Then you have Castle Grayskull, which is always a hit, regardless of melee or range. And also when you roll one of those, you acquire you acquire a power. So you roll an attack, see the number of hits that you score, subtract the possible armor of the character that you're attacking. Whatever is left is this number of actual ones that they take, which is recorded here on this track. Spend actions to move, spend actions to attack, spend actions to interact, or to use your personal unique abilities for your character. That's it. That's how you resolve your activations, by spending 2 actions, then activate the next character in the line, and continue like this, round after round, activation after activation, until a player has completed the objectives of the scenario, and the player, of course, wins the game. Masters of the Universe was a very special franchise to me when I was a kid. The cartoon may have been born out of the desire to sell toys to kids, which I didn't know, but it worked for me because I did have a cartoon that I liked and a set of toys that matched that story world. And so now I could interact with that fictional world in a way that other kinds of franchises didn't allow me to do. So I loved it. And since that was so important to me, feel free to take into account the possibility that there is an element of nostalgia in my assessment of Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia, which I also liked. I played it solo, multiplayer solo, meaning I played both sides at the best of my possibilities as I explored the different scenarios. And the way I did it actually worked very well. I simply randomized the activation cards. That's it. You just shuffle them and you place them on that line together. And I had a lot of unexpected moments, a plot twist, the character that I needed the most would not activate at the right time, and so on and so forth. A lucky activation for a character that seemed to be out of position, and so on and so forth. So it worked for me. If you want to play it, of course, multiplayer, well, there is that option. That's probably the default. And you also have an AI that you can explore in case you want to play true solo. But usually if I can multiplay a solo, I'll do that because it's easier to play and you have fewer mechanics to learn. Now, the game itself is highly thematic, and I think, again, that's a huge added bonus for those of us who are fascinated by the strange composite world where sci-fi and magic and technology and giant rideable feline monsters all come together. It feels right that the characters activate in specific ways, what they can do, the unique powers. I think there's been a good thematic work that has been done here. From Merman that creates water everywhere, Evelyn that uses mind control. The characters just, Horko has an endless hat and you don't know exactly what's coming out of that next. The characters really feel right. And one thing that maybe I don't say I'm conflicted about, a little bit mixed, is the idea of the controller versus player, which of course adds a layer of complexity. because the same characters will play differently. And so I guess that there are pluses and minuses. I personally didn't find that to be a problem. I see how somebody may find it unnecessary, and then I just wonder if you could just experiment with playing both sides as the player. Simply use the cards that way. Maybe you can let me know if that works for you. On the plus side, if you can deal with that little extra layer of complexity, then you have asymmetry and replay value, because yes, playing the same character on the player side or controller side does change things, which is good in the long run. So between, you have a ton of scenarios. You can play the same scenario with the same characters. You can play the same scenario with the same characters, switching which side is the controller and which side is the player. Again, huge replay value here. But how about play value? It's pretty good. What you have in essence here is a simple skirmish war game, because most of the game is about moving around and finding the right opening, the right positions to attack people. There are other objectives, and sometimes, especially for one of the sides, no, there aren't. Many times the objective is you need to KO a number of models of the opponent. So for them, it's pure wargaming. But also, the wargaming, destroy enemy troops is not just the sole objective. Sometimes you need to take a place, defend a position, take control of the capital, establish a supply line. So like in real war, attacking the enemy troops is not the goal but the means. And here is the same situation in some objectives, some scenarios where you need to move a certain piece of equipment, retrieve something, escort Prince Adam who misplaced something really important and you can't figure out where the heck he left it. That's a fun premise for a scenario, and there is a scenario like that in this game. So it's a skirmish war game, but it's very simple in its essence, but it has just a nice degree of flexibility. You can see the family resemblance with many games that we have had in the last 10-15 years, in which you got two actions, move and attack, or attack and move, or attack and do a special interaction. From the Dungeons and Dragons board games of the early 2010s to other games. We've had a lot of games in this family, nothing wrong with that, because it's a familiar concept so that we can easily latch onto, but that can bring a lot of flexibility, tactical flexibility, and then just system flexibility, because the system being so simple, you can add something around it to make it more unique, and it still remains very manageable. And here the idea of the power, almost this yin and yang that fluctuates around and tends to be to go from the characters to the controller, and can be used for so many different things. So that's very nice. I think that's a very interesting touch to the basic idea of two actions, move and attack and move, interact and move, something like that. The other interesting idea is the escalation, the acceleration as the scenario becomes more exciting because different powers are unlocked, which is precisely what I think a good game should have. A good game, my favorite games are not rinse and repeat, are not flat repetition. They tend to have a climatic arc, and this game does that very well, where you have more powers, more abilities, more things to do in the later phases of a scenario, as both sides are usually getting closer to defeating the opponent and possibly being defeated. Maybe I'm just one model away, from one KO away from defeating you, but you are one objective away from defeating me. That's a situation that I've seen happen fairly often, and it's very fun, very exciting. So overall, I really enjoyed Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia. The production is very nice, everything looks good. It's thematic, it plays well, it is smooth, it flows nicely, simple core concepts that, however, add up to interesting gameplay, huge replay value. So definitely, I'm very pleased with this game.